Hello, my name is Tristan, 33 years old, living in a small house in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, where quiet streets stretch beneath the shadow of the majestic Rocky Mountains. I work as a plumber, a hands-on job that leaves me covered in grease and sweat-soaked clothes every day, but it also gives me a sense of authenticity and vitality. I don't have the glamorous titles or vast wealth that my siblings possess. They are entrepreneurs, executives, doctors, and investment fund managers, people whose names alone make others gasp in admiration. And me? I'm just Tristan the plumber, whom my family often looks at with a mix of pity and mockery. My house isn't large, but it's cozy. In the evenings, my wife Ellie and I often sit on our old armchair in the living room, the warm orange glow from the table lamp casting soft patterns of light and shadow on the walls. Ellie is a literature teacher at a nearby high school, a gentle yet strong woman who always knows how to make me laugh, even when a grueling workday leaves me exhausted. We're not rich, but we're happy. Or at least I thought we were, until family gatherings made me realize how small I felt in the eyes of those I love most. My family, the Bennetts, is one that outsiders look at with awe. My parents, Richard and Margaret Bennett, were esteemed university professors before they retired. They live in a grand mansion in an affluent Boston suburb, where the streets are lined with oak trees and the houses boast intricately carved iron gates. My eldest brother, William, is a successful entrepreneur who owns a chain of upscale restaurants stretching from New York to Los Angeles. My older sister, Catherine, is a cosmetic surgeon with her own clinic in Manhattan, catering to A-list celebrities and the elite. And my youngest sibling, James, is an investment fund manager in Chicago, always appearing in perfectly tailored suits, spouting financial jargon I can never quite grasp. And then there's me, the odd one out. At family gatherings, as everyone gathers around a polished walnut dining table, the conversation inevitably revolves around William's multi-million-dollar deals, Catherine's high-profile surgeries, or James's sharp market predictions. I sit there quietly picking at my food, trying to interject with stories about my work, like the time I fixed a pipe and saved an entire neighborhood from flooding. But their eyes glide over me as if I'm just a faint shadow in the dazzling portrait of our family. "Tristan, you're still doing that plumbing thing?" William once asked, his tone laced with a hint of sarcasm, though his smile tried to pass it off as friendly. "Don't you ever get tired of being so grimy all the time?" I forced a smile, trying not to take it to heart. "It's fine, man. This job keeps me going and I like it." "Sure, as long as it's fine," Catherine chimed in, raising her wine glass, her eyes skimming over me as if I were a stranger. "But don't you ever think about doing something bigger? I mean, you're still young, you've got opportunities." Their words, whether subtle or blunt, always made me feel like an outsider. My parents didn't say much, but I knew they agreed with my siblings. My mother once sighed, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said, "Tristan, you're the kindest one in the family, but you need to try harder so you don't fall behind." Those words, though gentle, cut into me like a knife. But I don't resent them. I love my family, even though that love can be exhausting at times. I still show up to family gatherings, call to check in on my parents, and send birthday gifts to my siblings. I want to prove that even as just a plumber, I have value, that I'm still part of the family. Ellie always tells me I don't need to try so hard to earn their approval, but I can't stop hoping. I want them to look at me with pride, the way they look at William, Catherine, or James. Things started to change 2 years ago when my work unexpectedly took off. I began landing bigger contracts, fixing plumbing systems for commercial buildings and upscale apartment complexes. I worked hard, learned about management, and slowly but surely my small company started to gain a reputation. I didn't become a millionaire like William or James, but I earned enough to buy a new car, pay off our mortgage, and even save a decent amount. Ellie and I started dreaming of bigger things, not to show off, but to build a better life for ourselves. Then an idea sparked in my mind, one that I thought could change everything. I wanted to organize a family vacation, a luxurious trip to Europe. I wanted to take my parents, my siblings, and their families to dazzling cities like Paris, Rome, or Barcelona. I wanted them to see that I, Tristan the plumber, could do something grand. More importantly, I wanted us to be a real family, no more dismissive glances, no more hurtful words. I shared the idea with Ellie one evening as we sat on our porch gazing at the twinkling stars in the Colorado sky. "I want to take the whole family to Europe," I said, my voice brimming with excitement. "A really epic trip, you know. I'll cover everything. Hotels, flights, restaurants, all of it. I want them to see that I can do something worth being proud of." Ellie looked at me, her eyes gentle but tinged with concern. "Tristan, it's a wonderful idea, but are you sure? I mean, your family, they don't always appreciate you. I don't want you to get hurt again." I took her hand, smiling. "I know, Ellie, but I want to try. I want them to see I'm not a failure. And more than anything, I want us to be a real family." Ellie sighed but nodded. "All right, if you're set on it, I'll help you plan. But you have to promise me if they hurt you again, you won't let them keep doing it." I nodded, a fire burning in my chest. I didn't know then that this decision would lead me into an emotional storm, where every value, belief, and shred of self-worth I had would be tested to its core. In the months that followed, Ellie and I dove into planning. We researched destinations, booked 5-star hotels in Paris, Michelin-starred restaurants in Rome, and private tours in Barcelona. I dipped into our savings, calculated every expense, and made sure everything was perfect. I wanted my family to have an unforgettable experience, to see that I wasn't just some ordinary plumber. I sent emails to my parents, William, Catherine, and James, announcing the trip. I wrote enthusiastically, saying I wanted us to create beautiful memories together. Their replies were brief, polite, but I could sense the skepticism in their tone. I didn't let it bother me. I thought that once they saw what I had prepared, they'd change how they viewed me. As the departure date approached, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. I imagined our family gathered together, laughing and sharing warm moments. I pictured my parents hugging me, saying they were proud of me. I imagined William, Catherine, and James looking at me with respect, the way they looked at each other. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "Tristan, you're dreaming too big." When we boarded the plane, I looked at Ellie, who was holding my hand tightly. "Everything's going to be okay, right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She smiled, though her eyes betrayed her worry. "It'll be okay, Tristan. But no matter what, you've got me." I nodded, trying to push away the unease. But as the plane took off, carrying us to Europe, I had no idea that this trip would not only change how I saw my family, but also transform who I was. The plane landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris early in the morning, as the first rays of sunlight slipped through thin clouds, casting a golden glow over the ancient rooftops in the distance. I stood at the baggage claim area, my heart pounding with anticipation. Ellie held my hand, her smile radiant, but I knew she was also trying to mask her own anxiety. We had planned this trip for months, and now my entire family, my parents, William, Catherine, James, and their spouses and children, were here. Ready for a vacation I hoped would be a turning point in our relationship. I had booked a 5-star hotel in the heart of Paris, a place that even William, with his discerning taste, had to nod in approval. The hotel was on the Champs-Élysées, with rooms adorned in classic French decor and large windows overlooking the sparkling cityscape. I had paid for everything: business-class flights, limousine transfers, meals at Michelin-starred restaurants, and private tours to explore Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. I wanted everyone to feel my generosity, not to boast, but to prove that I too could accomplish something grand, that I deserved their respect. But from the very first moments, I sensed an odd atmosphere. As we gathered in the hotel lobby, I noticed that my siblings' expressions weren't what I had hoped for. William, in a sharp navy suit and polished leather shoes, was engrossed in his phone, offering only a cursory nod when I greeted him. Catherine, in an elegant silk dress, was chatting with James, both laughing loudly about some story I wasn't invited to join. My parents, as usual, stood on the sidelines smiling at me, but with their eyes drifting toward my siblings as if waiting for them to take the lead. "Hey, everyone," I said, trying to sound cheerful as I pulled Ellie's and my suitcases closer. "You all doing okay? How was the flight?" "Oh, it's fine, Tristan," my mother replied, her voice gentle but tinged with a certain distance. "You've arranged everything quite well." "Indeed," my father added, giving my shoulder a perfunctory pat. "This hotel looks impressive." I smiled, feeling like a kid being praised for a homework assignment. But William, Catherine, and James merely glanced at me before resuming their conversation, as if I were a waiter who had finished his task and no longer warranted attention. Ellie noticed my discomfort and squeezed my hand lightly, whispering, "Ignore them, honey. We're here to have fun." I nodded, trying to shake off the unease, but deep down I knew things wouldn't be as simple as I had imagined. On our first day in Paris, I had planned a dinner at a renowned Michelin-starred restaurant by the Seine. I wanted the family to gather, savor exquisite dishes, and admire the twinkling lights of the Eiffel Tower. As we sat at the table, I felt a swell of pride. The table was adorned with white silk linens, crystal glasses glimmering under the chandelier, and the menu printed on elegant parchment. I had chosen this place because I knew William and Catherine prided themselves on their refined culinary tastes, and I wanted them to see that I could choose a place worthy of their standards. But the dinner didn't unfold as I had hoped. William, Catherine, and James dominated the conversation, discussing William's latest business ventures, Catherine's celebrity clients, and James's razor-sharp financial predictions. They laughed loudly, clinked glasses and toasts to one another as if only the three of them existed at the table. My parents occasionally chimed in, asking about my siblings' work while Ellie and I sat there, practically invisible. "So, Tristan, what are you doing here?" James suddenly asked, his tone laced with feigned curiosity. "I mean, in Paris? Are you fixing the hotel's plumbing or something?" The table erupted in laughter, as if it were the funniest joke they'd ever heard. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I tried to stay calm. "No, James," I replied evenly. "I'm here to take the family on a trip. I thought it'd be fun for us to enjoy this together." "Oh, right," Catherine said, sipping her wine. "Thanks, Tristan. This trip is interesting." But the way she said it, the way her eyes slid over me, made me feel like I was just the guy footing the bill, nothing more. Ellie placed her hand on my thigh under the table, a small gesture of comfort, but I could see she was angry too. She didn't say anything, quietly eating her meal, but I knew she was holding back to keep things from getting worse. The days that followed only deepened my sense of alienation. I had planned a private tour for the entire family to explore the Louvre, but that morning, when Ellie and I arrived at the meeting point in the hotel lobby, the rest of the family was nowhere to be found. I called William, but he didn't pick up. Catherine and James didn't respond to my texts either. Finally, my mother sent a brief message. "Your siblings wanted to do their own thing for a bit, please understand." I stood there in the opulent hotel lobby feeling like a fool. Ellie looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. "What are they doing, Tristan? I mean, you paid for everything and they just ditch you like this?" I shrugged, trying to keep my voice calm. "They probably just wanted to do something on their own. It's fine. We can still go to the Louvre." But when we got to the museum, I overheard a tour guide mention that William, Catherine, and James had booked a separate VIP tour with a group of wealthy friends they knew in Paris. They hadn't just left Ellie and me behind. They had deliberately excluded us. A sharp pain stabbed at my chest, as if someone had plunged a knife into my self-esteem. That evening, at an upscale bar I had reserved for the whole family, I witnessed their distance even more starkly. William, Catherine, and James showed up in expensive outfits, blending effortlessly into the elite crowd as if they were born to belong there. When Ellie and I walked in, dressed neatly but simply, Catherine shot me a look of irritation, as if our presence embarrassed her. She pulled William and James to a corner, whispered something, and the three of them left shortly after, leaving Ellie and me standing silently in the lavish setting. "Tristan, they don't deserve you," Ellie said, her voice trembling with anger. "You've done everything for them, and this is how they treat you?" I didn't respond right away. I just watched my siblings' retreating figures disappear through the bar's glass doors. In that moment, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, they would never see me as an equal. I was Tristan, the plumber, the one who didn't belong in their glittering world. The days in Rome were even worse. I had rented a luxurious villa on the outskirts with a garden full of roses and a pool overlooking the ancient city. I had imagined the family dining together under the moonlight, sharing stories. But reality was far different. William, Catherine, and James continued to organize their own activities, from wine-tasting parties with their wealthy friends to exclusive tours that didn't include Ellie or me. My parents, though they didn't join them, didn't stand up for me either. They offered vague excuses like, "Don't take it to heart, your siblings are just busy." But what hurt the most was how they treated me in public. Once, at a renowned restaurant in Rome, I ran into Catherine while she was dining with a group of her clients. I smiled, about to wave hello, but she gave me a cold stare and turned away, as if she didn't know me. I stood frozen, feeling as though I'd been slapped across the face. Ellie, standing beside me, gripped my hand tightly, her voice shaking. "Tristan, I can't take this anymore. They don't just disrespect you, they're humiliating you." I didn't say anything, but inside, a fire began to burn. I had paid for everything, flights, hotels, meals, and yet they treated me like I was invisible. I started to wonder, why should I keep putting up with this? Why should I keep trying to earn their approval when they clearly don't value me? That night in our hotel room in Rome, I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Ellie curled up beside me, her breathing steady, but I knew she was troubled too. I thought about the months of hard work, the late nights spent planning this trip, and the naive hope that my family would finally see me differently. But all I had received was coldness and disdain. "Ellie," I whispered, unsure if she was asleep, "do you think I was wrong to try to do this?" She opened her eyes, looking at me in the dim light of the room. "Tristan, you weren't wrong. You have a big heart, and you wanted your family to be happy, but they don't deserve it." I stayed silent, letting her words sink in. And then, in that moment, a decision flashed in my mind. I couldn't let them keep treating me this way. I had done everything I could, but if they didn't appreciate it, I wouldn't let them continue to trample on my self-respect. The next morning, I sat in front of my laptop, reviewing all the bookings, hotels, tours, restaurants, transportation. I looked at Ellie, my voice more resolute than ever. "I'm canceling everything. We'll go on our own, just the two of us. I don't want to continue this trip with them anymore." Ellie looked at me, her eyes a mix of surprise and pride. "Are you sure, Tristan? Canceling everything will cost a lot of money." "Money doesn't matter," I said, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "What matters is that I'm done living in their shadow." I began clicking the cancel buttons on the booking websites, one service at a time. With each click, I felt lighter, as if I were cutting the invisible strings tying me to my family's disdain. I knew this decision would stir up a storm, but I no longer cared. Ellie and I would have our own trip, and this time I wouldn't let anyone make me feel unworthy. The next morning, the sunlight of Rome filtered through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the marble floor of our hotel room. I sat in an armchair, my laptop on my lap, my fingers scrolling through the screen, double-checking each cancellation confirmation email. Hotels, tours, restaurants, transportation, all had been canceled, at the cost of a significant cancellation fee. But I felt no regret. Within me, a strange sense of freedom was growing, as if I had just cast off a burden that had weighed on my shoulders for years. Ellie emerged from the bathroom, her wet hair still clinging with droplets of water. She looked at me with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Are you done?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with anticipation. "Everything?" "Everything," I replied, closing the laptop and smiling. "Now it's just the two of us, Ellie. We're going to make this trip our own." She came closer, placing a hand on my shoulder, and I felt her quiet support. Are you sure, Tristan? They're going to lose it when they find out. Let them figure it out, I said, my voice more resolute than ever. I've done enough. If they don't appreciate it, that's their problem, not mine. We packed our bags and left the hotel before my family could notice. I had booked a small apartment in Florence through an app, a cozy place with a balcony overlooking the Arno River. I wanted us to start fresh, just the two of us, free from the shadow of my family's disdain or their unreasonable expectations. As the car took us away from Rome, I looked out the window, watching the ancient domes of the city fade into the distance, and a voice inside me whispered, "This is the first time you're truly free, Tristan." Meanwhile, back in Rome, my family began to realize the consequences of their choices. I wasn't there to witness it, but later, through desperate messages and calls, I pieced together the chaotic scene. William, Catherine, and James woke up in the luxurious villa, preparing for a day of sightseeing they assumed I had arranged, only to discover that everything was gone. No limousine waited at the gate, no private tours were scheduled, no tables were reserved at the Michelin-starred restaurants they had bragged about to their friends. The hotel informed them that their bookings had been canceled, and if they wanted to stay, they'd have to pay themselves, a cost that, as I later learned, they couldn't afford. William was the first to call, his voice a mix of panic and anger. "Tristan, what the hell is going on? You canceled everything? You know we're stuck in the middle of Europe with nothing, right?" I was sitting on the balcony in Florence, sipping an espresso, watching the Arno River glisten under the sunlight. I took a deep breath before responding. "Yeah, William, I canceled it all. I figured you guys could handle things on your own, right? After all, you didn't need me for your plans." "Tristan, don't mess around." His voice turned sharp. "You can't do this. You know we were counting on you for this trip." "Counting on me?" I let out a laugh, but there was no joy in it. "You, Catherine, and James have treated me like I'm invisible for days. You threw your own parties, went on your own outings, didn't even bother inviting me or Ellie. I paid for everything, but you made me feel like I didn't belong. So now, figure it out yourselves." I hung up before William could say more. My phone buzzed relentlessly afterward. Catherine, James, even my mother, but I didn't answer. Ellie sat beside me, placing her hand on mine, her eyes full of empathy. "You okay?" she asked. "Better than ever," I replied, and this time I truly meant it. While Ellie and I began our own adventure in Florence, my family in Rome descended into a crisis of their own making. William, who always boasted about his restaurant chain, was hiding a harsh truth. His business was crumbling. Several locations in New York and Los Angeles had closed due to losses, and bank loans were tightening their grip on him. Catherine, despite flaunting her Manhattan cosmetic clinic, was also struggling. Her elite clients were dwindling, and she had overspent to maintain her lavish image. James, the investment fund manager, was in even worse shape. His fund had been hit hard by a lawsuit, leaving him nearly bankrupt. They had come to Europe with the arrogance of success, believing this trip was just another chance to flaunt their wealth and status. But when I canceled all the bookings, they were thrust into a situation where they could no longer hide the truth. With no money, no plans, and no me to rely on, they were forced to face the consequences of their pride and their mistreatment of me. Catherine was the next to reach out, her voice trembling in a voicemail. "Tristan, please, we need to talk. We can't afford the hotel anymore, and we don't know what to do. Please help us, at least with plane tickets home." I listened to the message but didn't respond. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel pity either. They had chosen to treat me like an outsider, and now they had to take responsibility. I remembered Catherine's cold stare at the Rome restaurant when she pretended not to know me to avoid embarrassment in front of her clients. I recalled William's mocking laughter about my job. I remembered how James looked at me as if I were a failure not worth his time. Those memories hardened my resolve. Meanwhile, in Florence, Ellie and I began to enjoy our trip in a way we hadn't been able to while tied to my family. We wandered through narrow cobblestone streets where vendors called out in sing-song Italian. We stopped at a small cafe, savoring gelato under the warm sun. laughing about little things. I felt as if I had been freed from an invisible prison, one I had locked myself in with hopes of earning my family's approval. One afternoon, as we stood on the Ponte Vecchio watching small boats glide along the Arno, Ellie turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "Tristan, I've never seen you this relaxed. You look truly happy." I smiled, pulling her close. "Because I realized something, Ellie. I don't need them to feel worthy. I have you, and I have myself. That's enough." But even in that moment of happiness, I knew my family was sinking into crisis. A part of me wondered if I was being too harsh, if I should give them a chance. But then I remembered the days in Paris and Rome, the dismissive glances, the hurtful words, and I knew I had done the right thing. They needed to learn a lesson, and I wasn't responsible for bailing them out. In the days that followed, I received more messages from my family. My mother called, her voice choked with emotion. "Tristan, where are you? We're family. You can't abandon your parents and siblings like this. Please help us." The message tugged at my heart. I loved my parents, but I also knew they had never truly stood up for me when my siblings belittled me. They always chose silence, leaving me to face the hurt alone. I sent a brief reply. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I've done all I could. Now everyone has to figure things out." James sent a long email trying to explain that they hadn't meant to offend me, that they were just busy and didn't think much of it. But those excuses only fueled my anger. They weren't careless, they were deliberate. They had chosen to push me out of their world, and now they were paying the price. Later, I learned that my parents and siblings had moved to a cheap hotel on the outskirts of Rome, with cramped rooms and no air conditioning. William, Catherine, and James scrambled to find affordable flights home. My parents, though not directly part of their arrogance, were caught in the fallout. For the first time, they faced the reality that their successful children weren't as flawless as they believed. I didn't feel joy learning this, but I didn't feel guilt either. I had spent my life trying to earn their approval, and this time I chose myself. I chose Ellie, our happiness, and the self-respect I had lost for too long. The days that followed saw Ellie and me exploring Florence on our own terms. Free from packed schedules or the pressure to please my family, we did whatever we wanted. We strolled across the Ponte Vecchio, buying small souvenirs from street vendors, and spent hours in a cozy cafe, sipping cappuccinos and talking about everything. From our dreams to silly things like the time I tried to learn Italian cooking and nearly burned down the kitchen. Those moments, though simple, made me feel more fulfilled than ever before. After Florence, we headed to Barcelona. I had booked a small apartment near Barceloneta Beach where we could hear the waves crashing at night. We wandered down La Rambla, savored tapas at a quaint eatery, and even took a flamenco dance class, where my clumsiness sent Ellie into fits of laughter until tears streamed down her face. With each passing day, I realized that happiness didn't come from earning my family's approval, but from the moments I shared with the woman who truly loved me. After 2 weeks in Europe, Ellie and I returned to Denver. Our little house, with its pale blue walls and small garden full of daisies, had never felt so dear. I felt like a different person, stronger, more confident, and most importantly, no longer inferior in the eyes of my family. The trip had changed me, not just because of the beautiful sights or the joyful moments with Ellie, but because I had learned to value myself above all else. But the peace didn't last long. 3 weeks after we returned, on a Saturday afternoon while I was fixing a pipe in the bathroom, the doorbell rang. Ellie went to answer it, and I heard her voice laced with surprise. "William? Catherine? What are you all doing here?" I wiped my hands on an old rag and walked into the living room to find all three of them, William, Catherine, and James, standing in the middle of my house. My parents weren't there, but my siblings' eyes were filled with a mix of anger and unease. William, always impeccably dressed, looked slightly disheveled, his hair no longer meticulously styled. Catherine, though still trying to maintain her polished appearance, couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. James, the quietest of them, stood silently, but I could see his hands clenched, as if holding back something. "Tristan, William spoke first, his voice stiff. "You owe us an explanation. You canceled everything in Europe, left us stranded in Rome like beggars. What do you think you're doing?" I looked at him, then at Catherine and James, who stood behind him, their eyes brimming with reproach. A part of me wanted to laugh. Here they were, the ones who always saw me as lesser, standing in my home demanding answers. But I held back, keeping my voice calm, though my heart was pounding. "I don't owe you any explanation," I said, locking eyes with William. "I paid for everything on that trip, flights, hotels, restaurants, everything. I did it because I wanted us to be a family, because I wanted you to see that I'm worth something too. But what did you do? You threw your own parties, went on your own outings, and treated me and Ellie like we were invisible. You even pretended not to know me in public because you were embarrassed. So why are you here now? To blame me for protecting my self-respect?" Catherine stepped forward, her voice trembling but still clinging to a trace of haughtiness. "Tristan, you're blowing this out of proportion. We didn't mean to hurt you. We were just busy, and we have our own connections. You can't just cancel everything and leave the whole family in a cheap hotel scrambling to find a way home." "Busy?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Catherine, you pretended not to know me at that restaurant in Rome because you were afraid I'd embarrass you in front of your clients. William, you mocked my job right at the dinner table. James, you didn't even bother talking to me like I didn't exist. You call that being busy? I call it disrespect." James, the quietest of the three, finally spoke, his voice low but sharp. "Tristan, you don't understand. We have our own pressures, our own work. You think everything's easy for us? You think we wanted to rely on you?" I looked at him, and for the first time I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Desperation in their eyes. William, Catherine, and James, who always boasted about their success, now looked so small. And then, like a flash of clarity, it hit me. "You're not okay, are you?" I asked, my voice softening. "All that bragging, William's restaurant chain, Catherine's clinic, James's investment fund, it's not what you've made it out to be, is it?" The three of them fell silent, their eyes avoiding mine. William clenched his fists, Catherine looked down, and James turned away. Their silence said it all. I stepped closer, my voice calm but cutting. "I thought you were the successful ones, the ones I had to strive to be like. But now I see it. You're just good at pretending. Your businesses are failing, and you didn't have the money to cover yourselves in Europe. That's why you panicked when I canceled everything, isn't it?" "Tristan, enough," William snapped, but his voice wavered, lacking its usual confidence. "You have no right to judge us. You're just a plumber." "Yes, I'm a plumber," I said, standing taller, feeling bigger than ever before. "But I live by my own hard work. I don't pretend to be someone I'm not or hide my failures behind a flashy facade. I paid for that trip because I loved this family, but you threw my kindness away like it was trash. And now you're here demanding more? No, I'm done." Ellie, who had been standing by my side throughout the conversation, finally spoke. "You should leave," she said, her voice firm but polite. "Tristan has done more than enough for this family. If you don't appreciate him, don't expect him to keep helping you." Catherine burst into tears, but I wasn't sure if they were tears of regret or just desperation. William shook his head as if he couldn't believe this was happening. James stood silently, his eyes empty. They left without another word, leaving my house in a heavy silence. In the days following the confrontation with William, Catherine, and James, our little house in Denver returned to its peaceful rhythm. Each morning I woke up early, brewed coffee in our small kitchen, and watched Ellie tend to the daisy-filled garden in the yard. My plumbing work continued, with long days covered in grease but filled with purpose. I realized that, though not glamorous, this job was a part of who I was. Authentic, steadfast, and something to be proud of. But above all, I felt a freedom I had never known before. I was no longer haunted by my family's judgmental looks or consumed by the need for their approval. I was Tristan, and for the first time, I felt enough as myself. Ellie noticed the change in me. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars twinkle in the Colorado sky, she took my hand, her voice soft. "You're different now, Tristan. You're lighter, like you've let go of something." I smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I let go of what I needed to, Ellie. I used to think I needed my family to feel worthy, but now I know I only need you and myself." She rested her head on my shoulder, and we sat there, quietly savoring the peaceful moment. But deep down, I knew the story with my family wasn't fully closed. I didn't expect them to change, but I couldn't deny that they were still a part of me, however faint and distant. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear from William, Catherine, or James. Part of me felt relieved, but another part wondered what they were doing, whether they were truly facing the consequences of their arrogance or just hiding behind their polished facades. I didn't seek answers, but fate had a way of bringing them to me. One day, while working on a job site in downtown Denver, I received a call from my mother. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the phone screen, but eventually answered. Her voice came through frail and choked with emotion, unlike her usual calm demeanor. "Tristan, are you okay? I just want to talk to you." I sat down in a corner of the job site, wiping sweat from my forehead, and responded, "I'm fine, Mom. How about you?" She was silent for a moment, then sighed. "I'm not okay, Tristan. Things are tough. Your siblings, they're not what I thought they were." I listened as she recounted what had happened. William, whose restaurant chain was once his pride, had declared bankruptcy. Bank loans had tightened their grip, and he was forced to sell most of his assets to pay off debts. Catherine, who always boasted about her Manhattan cosmetic clinic, had shut it down after failing to attract new clients. She moved back in with my parents in Boston, trying to start over but failing. James, the investment fund manager, lost his job after the lawsuit and was now working for a small company with a modest salary. They, who once stood at the pinnacle of success, were now mere shadows of their former selves. "They won't admit it, but I know they regret it," my mother said, her voice trembling. "They were wrong to treat you the way they did, Tristan. I was wrong too. I didn't protect you, didn't stand up for you when your siblings belittled you. I'm sorry." Her apology caught me off guard. I felt a pang in my chest, not out of anger, but because I realized my mother too was a victim of misguided expectations about success. But I didn't let my emotions take over. "Mom, thank you for saying that," I replied calmly. "But I can't go back to how things were. I did everything I could for the family, but I can't keep living to please everyone. I need to live for myself." My mother cried over the phone, but I knew she understood. Before hanging up, she said something I'd never forget. "You're my strongest child, Tristan. I only wish I'd realized it sooner." That call was the last I heard from my family for a long time. I didn't know if William, Catherine, or James ever reflected on themselves or learned anything from what happened. Perhaps they continued living in their arrogance, trying to rebuild their polished images. Perhaps they changed, even just a little. But I no longer cared. They were no longer the center of my world. Ellie and I carried on with our life in Denver. My plumbing business thrived, taking on bigger contracts, and I began hiring more employees. Ellie was promoted to head of the literature department at her school and started writing a book, a story about self-respect and liberation, inspired by our own lives. We dreamed of new trips, not to prove anything, but to experience the world on our own terms. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the warm orange glow of the table lamp casting light on the walls, I pulled out a small notebook I had kept during our Europe trip. In it, I had written thoughts, emotions, and lessons I had learned. I reread a line I wrote in Florence. "Your worth isn't in how others see you, but in how you see yourself." Ellie looked at me, smiling. "What are you thinking about?" "The biggest lesson I've learned," I replied, closing the notebook, "that I don't need my family to feel worthy. I don't need their approval or their praise. I just need to be true to myself and to have you by my side." She hugged me, And in that moment, I knew I had found true happiness. Not in extravagant trips or grand successes, but in the peace of my soul, in genuine love, and in the self-respect I had reclaimed. My story didn't end with a triumphant victory or a dramatic reconciliation with my family. It ended in quietness, in learning to put myself above others' expectations. William, Catherine, and James, with their arrogance and pretense, faced the consequences of their own choices. They struggled in Europe not because I canceled the bookings, but because they had built their lives on lies and bravado. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel guilty either. They chose their path and I chose mine. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't just about self-respect, but about realizing that family isn't always where you find love and respect. Sometimes you have to create your own family, not by blood, but with those who truly value you. For me, that was Ellie, who stood by me even when I doubted myself. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day I'll see my family again and we'll talk. Not as strangers, but as people who have learned to respect one another. But if that day never comes, I'm okay with it. I've found my path and I'll keep walking it with Ellie by my side, with the confidence and freedom I've reclaimed.